Can you see me and can you hear me? Let me know. Down. I am somewhere around. This is actually our very last Hornbill lesson for term 1. So we're almost done with the textbook, which is great news. Yeah, I definitely seem to be here. I'm just gonna add some water. Hi, I'm Shree. I'm your English educator for grade 11. We generally meet from 7 to 8 every day, and so far we have finished all the other Hornbill chapters for term 1. What we're going to do after this is we're going to finish this chapter first today, obviously, and for the next week we're going to do some revision. Yeah, that is the plan for the next week. So keep an eye out for links about quizzes. I'll send them on the Telegram group. I forgot to send today's on the Telegram group, but yeah, I'll make sure I do that from Monday. Today we're doing the photograph by Shirley Tilson. And who is Shirley Tilson? Shirley Tilson is, she's a poet, she is a writer, she writes a lot of things, especially about nature. Well, not exactly nature, she writes a lot about the countryside of Britain, I believe. But yeah, that's Shirley Tilson. Here we're going to be reading a poem that she's written called The Photograph. And as the title tells us, it is very much about a photograph. We will get into the actual poem in a bit. Good evening to Akshat. Nice to have you here. But before we start, I just want to tell you two things really quickly. One, our method for reading a poem is to start, read the whole poem together, and then get into each verse and try to understand it, and then pick up on themes related to it. After that, we will do why is the poem structured like this, and we will do poetic devices. That will be near the very end. Second thing that I want to tell you is that I speak, as you can probably tell already, in English. I know that has been a problem in the past. If you have any questions or you can't entirely understand something that I'm saying, then leave it in the chat for me. I'll check the chat every couple of minutes and I will definitely reply to you about whatever question you have. Okay? We should get into the poem now. So I'm going to start reading the poem and we're going to read it together first. The cardboard shows me how it was when the two girl cousins went paddling, each one holding one of my mother's hands, and she the big girl, some 12 years or so. All three stood still to smile through their hair at the uncle with the camera. A sweet face, my mother's, that was before I was born. And the sea, which appears to have changed less, washed their terribly transient feet. That's verse 1. Some 20, 30 years later, she'd laugh at the snapshot. See Betty and Dolly, she'd say, and look how they dressed us for the beach. The sea holiday was her past, mine is her laughter, both wry with the labored ease of loss. And that is verse 2. Now she's been dead nearly as many years as that girl lived, and of this circumstance there is nothing to say at all. Its silence silences. And that is verse 3. That is the entire poem. It's a very brief poem, but it still has a lot in it. First things first, I want you to kind of think about what this poem is maybe about. If you have any replies that you want to share with me, you can put it in the chat and I'll look at them. But I want to give us 10 seconds to kind of think about this poem a little bit. And maybe when you have a set of thoughts in your head, you could put it down in the chat for me. the cardboard shows me how it was. The cardboard, here the cardboard refers to a piece of like cardboard on which a photograph is stuck. Back in like older times, they didn't always have like photo frames, right? So what they used to do to make sure that like really thin photographs wouldn't fly off is stick them onto like cardboard. So here the narrator is talking to us about a photograph stuck onto a piece of cardboard, and she's telling us that it shows her how it used to be. So something in the past is what it shows her, and it shows her what? When two girl cousins went paddling. Paddling is going to the beach, going to the water and sort of like playing around in it with your feet and your hands, right? That's what paddling refers to. So it shows her an old memory back when two cousins went to the beach, each one holding one of my mother's hands, and she, the big girl, some 12 years or so. And with these two girl cousins was the narrator's mother, and all three of them were clearly of the same age group, except the mother was the oldest, and she was around 12 years old. And in the photograph, both of these girl cousins are holding onto the oldest girl's hands, so they're both holding onto the narrator's mother's hands. And so we get like a nice little image of like what the photograph is. Three girls standing in a row with the narrator's mother in the center, and the narrator's mother is around 12 years old. All three stood still to smile through their hair at the uncle with the camera. And all three of those girls are just like still, and they're standing still because like it's a photograph. There's obviously no movement in a photograph that we can see. And they're smiling through their hair, which is to say that there's probably been a breeze, they've probably been playing, their hair has gotten really messed up, and they're smiling through like their messed up hair, which is all over their faces, which says that it's been a good day. So not only is it like a photograph about a day they went to the beach, it's about a photograph about a day that was happy for them. A sweet face, my mother's, that was before I was born. And the narrator tells us, my mother's face was really sweet when she was young. She looks really cute. And that was so long before I was born, before I like even existed as a thought probably. And the sea, which appears to have changed less, washed their terribly transient feet. Terribly transient? Transient means temporary, right? Why is the narrator calling the feet of these girls temporary? She's trying to tell us, oh, these people change. Human beings change. They grow older and they grow older and they grow older. And life passes by really quickly for us. And the sea, on the other hand, doesn't change a lot, right? It takes like centuries upon centuries upon centuries for any sort of change to happen in nature. And she's sort of like, I'm looking at the sea in this photograph, and if I went to the sea now, both of those seas would look the same. But I can't say the same for those girls in the photograph. They've grown up. And that's obviously true, because now we're hearing from like that 12-year-old girl's like daughter. So she's like grown much older, gotten married, had a child. A lot has happened. A lot has changed. And that is everything that this verse is trying to tell us. Couple of themes from this. First, we get like the photograph that gives this poem the title. So they ask you, what is the photograph in this poem? You should be able to tell them, like, there is this photograph that the narrator's mother has of her childhood, and it's a photograph in which three girls are holding hands and they've been to the beach. That's the photograph. And in that photograph, we see that there's a story, right? What do I mean by that? I mean that when you look at that photograph, a memory is evoked in your mind. You remember like this particular day in your past when this particular set of things happened. So photograph is a way of capturing time. We all know that, right? We take a lot of photographs in order to like try and remember the good things that have happened in our lives. And just like that, this photograph is a way of preserving the past. It's a way, for instance, for the mother to tell her daughter, look at this photo and like, you know, look at that day on which this happened. And it's a way of sharing like what happened with people who you meet much after like the event itself happened. And we'll see like something about that in the next verse. Another thing this verse does is that it sets up a contrast between the sea and those little girls. And it's setting up a contrast through the sea and the little girls between nature and human beings. And the contrast is simply that nature is everlasting and slow to change, whereas human beings change very quickly, and human beings die, right? So our time on this earth is very temporary. The earth will long outlive us. So that's the kind of contrast that's being set up. And we're being invited in the first verse itself to think about the temporariness of everything. From like that moment when they went to the beach, it was a temporary moment, one moment in their lives. And it's been captured in this photograph, but it's only a memory now. It's not really a moment that is capable of happening now, because as I said, they've already grown up, right? And another form of temporariness is the temporariness of life, and how human beings grow older and older and older, and eventually we die. So all of that is what we get from the first verse. Some 20, 30 years later, she'd laugh at the snapshot. So here we get to see how the mother is still looking at the snapshot and even laughing at it, 20 to 30 years later. 20, 30. It's not that the narrator isn't sure whether it was 20 years or 30 years, right? It's just that the narrator is kind of trying to show us, oh, maybe it was multiple times really that my mother has looked at this photograph and laughed at it. So 20, 30 suggests that multiple times probably the narrator's mother has looked at this photograph. It's like saying 20 years, even 30 years later. See Betty and Dolly, she'd say, and look how they dressed us for the beach. And her cousins' names are Betty and Dolly. So she'd show her daughter the photograph and she'd be like, look at those two. And look how they being the family of these little girls, dressed all of us for the beach. So she shares the memory with her daughter. Again, a photograph is a way of passing on a memory to other people in your life. And in this particular case, the memory is a good one, and so the mother laughs at the photograph. There's an expression of joy in it. The sea holiday was her past, mine is her laughter. Both ride with the labored ease of loss. We find out in the next verse that the narrator's mother is dead, right? And that's why the narrator tells us that the sea holiday was the mother's past. So when her mother talks about the photograph and she talks about that event in her life, it's about something that happened long ago to her. But for the narrator, her past is the memory that she shares with her mother, in which her mother shows her the photograph and thinks about her past, right? That laughter of her mother when she looks at that photograph, that is the past of the narrator. That's what the narrator can remember. Both ride with the labored ease of loss. That's a very difficult sentence, and we'll get into it as we keep talking about themes. But first I want to see if you have any questions. Hello Kanishka. Oh, this is your favorite poem. Why is it your favorite? I'm very interested. I really like this poem too. It's very powerful. Hello to Shana also. Okay, let's keep going. But you can tell me why it's your favorite poem, because I'm still interested in hearing why. It's a very emotional poem, so I can definitely understand it being a favorite poem. So yeah, that 2030 is suggesting that possibly the mother repeatedly looked at that photograph. And another thing that we get from this particular verse is that the photograph it's not only the memory of the mother's past, right? For the narrator, it's also that particular memory that she shared with her mother when her mother showed her the photograph. So taking that photograph went on to create new memories in the mother's life also, where she can share her stories with her daughter. And what we get, the key theme really in this verse is the idea of how memories can be painful, right? And we get it here. The narrator says, both rye with the labored ease of loss. What this suggests, first of all, is that there is loss in remembering those past memories. There's loss for the mother and there's loss for the daughter. The loss of the daughter is just that she has lost her mother, right? She won't be able to hear her mother's laughter again. So whenever she thinks about that memory, she feels that sense of loss. And when her mother looks at the photograph and thinks about her past, the loss that she feels is the loss of her childhood. The loss of like good times when she was younger and she could, go to the beach as a 12-year-old and have fun. So both losses are incredibly painful, and both losses are connected also in a particular way, and we'll talk about that when we hit the end of the session and we're talking about themes of the entire poem. But yeah, what we get in this verse is the idea of like memory being connected to pain, even though like memory gives you something good, right? These are good memories, and yet the loss of those memories, the fact that they are located in the past, can cause you pain. So we get that interesting sort of like memories are beautiful and yet they are like painful also theme in this particular verse. And now let's get on to the last line, which is my voice is cracking. Can you hear me better now? Is this maybe slightly better? Okay, good to know. The fan. What do I do about this? Well, it is really hot, so unfortunately I can't like switch the fan off. But I will try to hold the mic like closer to my mouth, and hopefully that will help a little bit. Let me know if you can't like hear me though. Okay, great. This is helping, so I will just go ahead and do this. Okay, so let's get into the very like last line, which is both rye with the labored ease of loss. Both here refers to both of those memories, the memories that the mother has of her past and that the daughter has of her mother. And the both rye means something that is definitely like funny in some way, yet not really funny. And what the narrator, is trying to tell us here is that it's good, but it's not good. It's bittersweet, which is to say, when she thinks about it and when her mother thinks about her past, they both feel pleasantness, but they also feel pain, right? And why do they feel that pain? As we talked about, it's because of that loss. I want us to talk a little bit also about what the phrase labored ease of loss means. Labored means difficult, ease means easy, and both of those words come together here to think about like something new about loss, which is whether loss can be both easy and difficult, right? And what that basically means is over time, as you get used to the loss, you get kind of like comfortable with it. It becomes something familiar to you, it becomes something easy, in the sense that you know what it is, you know what it's like, you know how to deal with it. But it's still labored in the sense that it's still difficult for you to have to go through it every day, and it's still difficult for you to get to a place where you are a little bit more familiar with it, a little bit more comfortable with it. It's like, I'm trying to think about an example. It's like, let's say, exercise If you're like new to exercise and you start today, right, then for like the next couple of days your body is going to be really sore, your muscles are going to hurt, and that's going to be the difficult bit. But as you keep going, eventually your muscles are going to get used to it. That doesn't mean that the exercise itself gets less difficult, right? But the pain itself becomes a little more like familiar to you and a little less like impactful on your body. And that's what this phrase, labored ease of loss, means. It's the way that we learn to live with loss, but the way that that process is still incredibly difficult for us. And that's what the narrator captures really brilliantly here in that particular phrase. And this passage, this verse gives us like the idea of mourning because of this sense of loss also. They're both like missing something, and they're both missing something that happened to them like once upon a time, a while ago. I hope you can still hear me. Now she's been dead nearly as many years as that girl lived. And of this circumstance, there is nothing to say at all. Its silence silences. Now she's been dead nearly as many years as that girl lived. That girl refers to the girl in the photograph, who is 12 years old, which tells us that the narrator's mother has been dead for 12 years now. That's a very long time. And the narrator says, and about this, I can't really say anything. It makes me speechless. Its silence silences. Its silence, it here refers to this circumstance, which is that the mother is dead. And the circumstance is silent because the narrator, is struck speechless by the kind of impact of her mother's death. And the silence of that, like, death has, like, silenced everything for the narrator. And it brings an end to the poem too, and we'll talk about that in a moment. 1 second, I'm trying to see it. Yeah. One theme that we get here is the idea that death leads to silences. There are no words left. I already talked about this while we were doing the poem, the verse. Another thing that we get here is that idea of like my mother's death silences, and in contrast, in the previous paragraph we had noise, right? We had like a mother laughing with her daughter. So when her mother was alive, there was this brightness, this laughter, this happiness, this sound, and now her mother is gone and there is silence. So it also like draws us to think about the previous verse and think about like that joy and that sound as compared to like the death, the absence, and the silence. So that's something else that like comes up in this verse. And very, very finally, its silence silences, and the narrator says there's nothing more to say, and then she stops telling us anything, right? That's where the poem ends. There is actually like nothing left to say to us anymore now that like she's told us that her mother is dead. That's all. And so the poem sort of like enacts like what it's saying. It comes to a close. Yeah. Those are a couple of things I wanted to talk to you about with regard to the poem. Let me know if you have any questions as of now. Shana, that's an oxymoron. Let me type that out to you. It's an oxymoron. We'll talk about like poetic devices in a brief bit. So, a couple of themes that we get from this particular poem. One is the question of what evokes a memory for us. And well, one of the things that evokes a memory very clearly in this poem is a photograph, right? But not just a memory within the photograph, which is to say it doesn't only remind us, for instance, about what happened in the mother's past, but also about what happened in the daughter's past, which is to say that you can make further memories with photographs, which is something that we spoke about when we were talking about the very first verse. The second thing that we get is all of these different kinds of loss, right? One of those is the end of childhood for the mother, and that is also like a very painful loss, because you could say in one way that it's the death of a child, right? You are never going to go back to being a child. and that is a very, very deep sense of loss. And in the same way, the narrator like loses her mother, and that's the death of like a person, the end of a life. So both of these losses are tied together in the sense that both of them are very final. There's no way to like revert back to like an earlier state of your age, and there's no way to like get back somebody who has died. So both of these losses are connected by their irreversibility. What we're going to do now is we're going to read the poem together again, and we're going to keep an eye out for like poetic devices. Okay, so if you find like a rhyme scheme, if you find like a particular poetic device, if you like find anything interesting about the way that this poem is structured, any of it, then like we'll talk about it in a moment after we finish reading the poem again. The cardboard shows me how it was when the two girl cousins went paddling, each one holding one of my mother's hands, and she the big girl, some 12 years or so. All three stood still to smile through their hair at the uncle with the camera. A sweet face, my mother's. That was before I was born. And the sea, which appears to have changed less, washed their terribly transient feet. Some 20-30 years later, she'd laugh at the snapshot. See Betty and Dolly, she'd say, and look how they dressed us for the beach. The sea holiday was her past, mine is her laughter. Both wry with the labored ease of loss. Now she's been dead nearly as many years as that girl lived, and of this circumstance there is nothing to say at all. Its silence silences. And first thing I want to ask you is whether there is a rhyme scheme in this poem, and you can let me know down in the chat. Well, there is actually no rhyme scheme in this poem. It is completely like rhyme scheme-less, which makes it an example of blank verse, which is a poem in which there is no rhyme scheme and no attempt at like creating any sort of like rhyming words at the end of like sentences. The second thing we should think about is the structure of this poem, right? When like poets divide their verses up, they're not just randomly doing it. There's a reason that the first verse is the first verse and it ends where it ends, and then a new verse begins. And in this particular poem, the reason that the three verses are divided the way that they're divided is because they represent three different points of time. The very first verse is located in the past of the mother. The second verse is located in the past that the daughter shares with the mother. And the last verse locates us in the present. The daughter is present because the mother is now dead, right? So each of these verses moves us from like the distant past to the more recent past to like the complete present. So each verse sort of like takes a leap in time. There's a shift in time in each verse, and that's the reason that the three verses are divided the way that they are. And you'll notice also that the interesting thing is that the last verse is the smallest verse, right? And it's the verse in which the narrator tells us, oh, you know what, I'm not going to speak anymore because my mother's death has just struck me silent. So the present is the thing about which the daughter has the least to say, and so that's represented in the way that verse is the shortest verse, which is very telling, right? Again, it sort of like enacts that silence that she says falls upon her when her mother dies. Couple of poetic devices now. One is alliteration. Alliteration is a poetic device when the words start with the same sounds right next to each other. So terribly transient, ta, stood still to smile, sa. The two, if like there are really small words like to or an or and all of those are sort of like ignored because like the consonant sounds around them are still like considered more important. So if there's like a to or like an or an or or an and, you can just ignore that and still say it's a case of alliteration. So terribly transient and stood still to smile are examples of alliteration. There is also personification here, and it's there in, for instance, the cardboard shows. Personification is when something is given a lifelike, human-like attribute that it doesn't usually have. For instance, if I say that my water bottle dances, then I'm personifying my water bottle. Like that, what's happening here is the cardboard is showing something. What's actually happening is that the narrator is looking at it, right? But she tells us, she phrases this as though the cardboard itself is showing it to her. So doing that, she gives an attribute to the cardboard that the cardboard doesn't have. She turns it a little bit into a person that can show things to another person. And we have an oxymoron, which is what Shana asked about. What is labored ease? A case where opposite words sort of come together at the same time is considered an oxymoron, right? Labored ease, for instance, difficult ease. They're completely like antonyms of each other, and it sounds like they shouldn't go together, but here they've been put together to create like some sort of added new meaning. It's like if you say, for instance, things are terribly good. That's a phrase that like we all use a lot these days. And terribly good is like, they're both like antonyms, right? Terrible and good are opposites of each other. But when we say it together, what we mean is, oh, it's like incredibly good. It's really, really good. Just like that, labored ease has been put together. They're both antonyms, but together they form a new phrase that we use to mean something different, which we already discussed earlier. There is also a case of a transferred epithet in this poem, and the transferred epithet is transient feat. What does a transferred epithet do? This is a situation in which a particular like adjective or word or action is sort of like connected to something, and it's actually supposed to be connected to something else entirely. For instance, here, using this example, the narrator says transient feet. She doesn't actually mean transient feet, right? She's not saying that only the feet change. She's saying the entire person changes, but the feet become a stand-in for the entire person, and so this is a case of transferred epithet. Instead of saying transient people, she said transient feet, but we're supposed to understand that transient, that particular like descriptor, applies to the entire person and not just the feet. So the epithet has been so that particular like attribute of transience has been transferred from the person to the feet. So that's a case of a transferred epithet. And I think that brings us to the very end of this lesson. That was a really, really short lesson, but this is a really, really short poem. So yeah, thank you for being here today. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm checking in the chat. And if you do have questions, then I will definitely take them. Okay, I don't think there are any questions, in which case we should bring this lesson to an end. I want to tell you about a couple of things before I leave, and one of them is the Unacademy app, which you can get off of Google Play Store or the Apple App Store, and you can try a lot of the features on it, which range from live quizzes to this, oh oops, I don't have the slide today, but to a very cool Ask a Doubt feature, on which you can like basically click and you can like upload a doubt that you have, and what will happen is once you upload it and you choose the subject that it falls under and you send it, somebody will get back to you with an answer, right? So if you have any conceptual doubts, if you have any like questions about anything really, you can like go ahead and put it down in the app and people will definitely reply to you. I also want to let you know about something called Unacademy Plus. It is basically an expanded version of YouTube lessons, except it gives you access to a lot more courses. It has a lot more courses on it. It has a lot more study material. It has practice tests and live tests and regular ones, so that you can like keep revising. It also gives you access to like doubt clearing sessions and answer writing sessions, which is something that we don't really do on YouTube. So you'll learn how to like write your answers better, how to attempt your question papers better. You'll also get like any questions that you have cleared. So all of those things are offered under Unacademy Plus. These are the prices of Unacademy Plus, and they vary based on the different durations that you take them for. But you can take it for a longer period of time, and it'll actually cost you a lot less per month. There is also something called Unacademy Iconic, and Iconic is basically for people who are uninterested in collective learning experiences. So if you think that you would benefit from working personally with like educators and working one-on-one with educators, then you should go ahead and get an Iconic subscription. That also involves like complete coverage of your syllabus and live doubt solving. You'll also get like weekly reports on how you're doing, and your parents will get to meet educators and tell you that who will like tell them how you're doing and things like that. Iconic also has different costs based on like the different durations that you take it for. But if you take it for longer, again it costs a lot less per month. You can also use my code for your Plus or Iconic subscriptions. It is THAR01, and it will give you a flat 10% discount. All of that said, thank you for being here with me today. If you like today's session, then do leave a like. Share it around if you think that it might benefit people. Let me know in the comments if there's any sort of specific feedback that you have for me. And finally, do subscribe if you enjoyed this content, because I'm making more content like this for you all the time.